Going home for the hurricane season is not because I'm afraid. It's rather that I have an apartment in the north of France, in the fishing port of Boulogne-sur-Mer, and I love being there during the late spring and all the summer. Winters, not so much. Golden Haze is my Beneteau 323, which is in a permanent berth here in Guadeloupe, in Bar du Fort Marina of the Leeward Islands section of the Caribbean. And I can fly by Air Caribe, Air France or Corsair back to Paris-Orly or Charles de Gaulle Airport for around €300 each way, say £260, and there are half a dozen flights a day. I book on all the airlines based purely on price, as the comfort and timings of all three are very similar. For reasons I don't totally understand, there can be €100 or €200 difference in price for a given day on each one, so a few hours Googling makes the decision pretty easy. I fly with only hand baggage and travel in the rear of the aircraft, as that's frequently boarded first. I always buy a very cheap seat besides a window on the right so I can sleep against the cabin wall rather than against my neighbour. And being in the rear, it's always easier to stow your hand baggage in the locker above the seats. All the flights land in France in the morning, so I reckon I can be home by lunchtime. I do spend a day or so putting the boat to bed and preparing her for the hurricane season just in case. If you look around the other boats in the marina, at this time of year, from late April to early May, many of the owners have already gone home for the hurricane season. They've laid their boats up by taking off the biminis, sails, spray dodgers, and all of that simply to produce windage. Most owners have tied their dinghies down and covered them against the oh-so-destructive sun damage, and just in case hurricane-force winds trek across the island. I take off the outboard from the stern bracket and stick it in the locker along with the dinghy and the life raft, partly to avoid some damage and partly so as not to encourage thieves who do sometimes pay the marina a visit at night, I'm told. I have a canvas cover for the wheel, pedestal and controls pod, which also protects the cockpit table. Firstly, I move Golden Haze away from the fixed pontoon, so hopefully any surge is not going to cause her to back up onto the fixed pontoons here in Bar du Fort. These solid, non-floating pontoons are mounted on fixed piles drilled into the seabed, and I'm pretty sure they're going to survive almost anything. But being tied to something fixed is a mixed blessing. Storm surge, even a marina that is in a bay, within a bay, is the thing that's going to damage my boat. Impact on the pontoon is the enemy. As you can see, the marina's in a bay within a bay that has a narrow entrance, so it's well protected. In this part of the Caribbean, the tidal range is a maximum of less than half a metre. I've got 4 fenders on the stern, and I'm still looking for a way to fix my old pontoon fenders in place, but haven't found a way of attaching them so far. Work in progress. My headlines to the pontoon mooring buoy are doubled and they're separate. My stern lines to the pontoon are also doubled up. 2 separate sets. I choose to leave the headsail on the spar, partly because being single-handed I find it difficult to rehoist it alone, and because the filled sail bag is so big it's difficult to get into the forepeak to stow for the winter. However, having made sure that the sail is tightly furled and it doesn't have padding in the sacrificial strip, I've put a line on the sheet cringle and tied it off tightly so the sail can't come unfurled. I make sure the outhaul is tight and firmly fastened, and the same for the sheets. I think I would have to be very unlucky to lose the furling Genoa in a storm, and the new UV strip should protect the canvas from the sun. The boom is very much the same. One of my many reasons for buying this particular boat was because she had in-boom reefing. Frankly, this is by far the best mainsail reefing system that I've ever had. So easy and foolproof to operate from the cockpit, and if something did jam, Then cutting the halyard would let the fully battened main just drop into the cockpit. I had in-mast furling in my Westerly 43, but it did sometimes jam up with the main half in and half out, and there was no easy solution to this. Well, the problem is that once the sail gets a bit baggy, it jams up inside the mast. The expensive solution is to keep buying new sails so they don't have time to get baggy. And that's not a solution I like very much. With my in-boom furling, I just make sure the boom cover is well secured so it protects the furled sail from the sun. I put a couple of extra reefs into the main so the head is just inside the boom and covered from the sun. If I did lose the mainsail cover in a blow, then it's not a big deal to have another one made up, and that beats getting the midday sun onto my mainsail. The day before departure, I fill the water tank so there is little space for air to contaminate the water, which I drink without purifying tablets or boiling. I really like these soft, wrinkly, expandable garden hoses, but I always have a spare on board as they don't last as long as the hard plastic ones. This boat has around 14 vangs, well, valves or seacocks, but I only bother to close the underwater ones and those very close to the waterline. The galley sink is underwater and big, but relatively easy to get at. The heads basin outlet is actually on the waterline, and the heads outlet and inlet are underwater, so I close all of those. Beneteau have a very clever design of only using one discharge pump for both the shower tray and the bilge. In the marina, I keep the shower tray connected as I use the shower facility daily, but when I leave the boat for a while, I switch it to bilge for obvious reasons. Just a toggle switch on the control panel above the chart table to activate it. There are two valves just behind the engine, one for raw water feed and the other for the shaft seal, and I leave the panels open just in case anyone wants to start the engine for some reason. Whilst I'm on board, I keep the camping gas connected to my cooker at all times, but when I leave her for a while, I turn the gas off before the flexible tube into the cooker and turn it off in the bottle in the gas compartment. I always unplug the 220-volt feed to the water heater, but I leave the battery charger connected to either charge or monitor both the engine start battery and the service domestic house battery. My contract with Digicel, the main French Caribbean mobile phone provider, is a fixed annual one, so I keep the little router on as well. I plug the Digicel SIM into a 12-volt mobile router and I run my mobile phone connections and my data feed to my laptop from there. I leave the 12-volt system on to run the router, but switch off everything else. And I unplug everything else. The same applies to the mains 220 appliances. I unplug every device except the surveillance tapo, which is there to give me a feel-good factor when I'm away from the boat. I can just open the app and see the interior of Golden Haze in real time. It also has a movement detector, so I can see historically if there have been visits or violent movement. All the interior doors and cupboard doors are left open so that, where possible, there's a chance of fresh air throughout the boat. And all the curtains and hatch blinds are closed to stop the sun damaging the interior. Finally, I pay a local boat company to visit the boat once a fortnight and open all the hatches to get some fresh air in. In a way, the €50 a month I pay for this is in reality part of my boat insurance cover. Yes, I mean they check the mooring lines and they air the boat, but more importantly for me is that should the worst happen and a category 3 or 4 hurricane decimate the marina, then I have professionals with a good relationship with the Capitainery to safeguard my boat and keep me informed. Having completed all the tasks on my departure day, I call a taxi and get driven to the airport in the afternoon for €30 or less, and this year I board a Corsair flight at 1900. Having eaten the airline dinner, I try to sleep during the 8-hour flight back to Europe, and I disembark at 0900 the following day in Orly Airport, Paris, and then get myself home. This type of Caribbean lifestyle of keeping the boat in a strong, well-founded marina with a permanent berth is used by literally thousands of French, American, Canadian, Dutch and German sailing families and individuals. And I think it's odd there are so few Brits doing it. I'm not sure why more Brits don't keep their boats out here and enjoy the possibility of having a boat in the sun that can be used all the year round. A quick plug for my book, Your Boat in the Sun, which looks at the costs and sailing possibilities of owning a boat based in the Caribbean and Mediterranean. It's available from my book library at www.gentlesailing.com. Owning and keeping a boat in a Caribbean marina is far less than owning an apartment out here, and probably half the cost of running one. You don't have to sail the boat across the Atlantic to locate it out here, as there are hundreds of yacht brokers and thousands of boats for sale. For the best marina deals out here, you need to look at the French islands of Martinique and Guadeloupe and Saint Martin. For example, my Beneteau 323 costs me less than €2,000 a year for its marina berth. It's around £1,600. And that includes electricity and water. Yes, the fully comp insurance for keeping the boat in the hurricane zone 12 months of the year in the water is an eye-watering €1,600 a year. But even that, if you combine it with the marina fee, is way below the total for a UK South Coast marina plus insurance. One advantage the French have over us Brits is that from Paris Charles de Gaulle or Orly airports, there are half a dozen flights a year out to these islands, and precisely none when I last looked from the UK to the French islands, which means you either have to take the train to Paris or jump onto a cheap Channel flight. Yes, there are flights from the UK to Trinidad, Grenada, St. Lucia, Antigua and the Virgin Islands, but these places are pretty expensive and the marina fees are fairly high. But, of course, they're well worth considering. If you want to spend your winter in the Caribbean at relatively low cost, then buying a boat out here and keeping it in a marina is a pretty good solution. With a UK address, you can register a French, American, Canadian or whatever boat on the small ships register for pennies. And when you get bored with the Caribbean sunshine lifestyle, you can just sell it on fairly easily through the local brokers. I mean, that's what Americans, Canadians and the French do in their thousands. The Caribbean is dependent on tourism, and for the most part, it's pretty easy going in terms of rules and regulations. Another way is to stick your existing boat on the deck of a cargo ship, as described in my video, How I Shipped My Beneteau 323 to the Sun, which you can find on my YouTube channel at Sailing Gently. As you'll see, it's a fairly challenging procedure, but for me worthwhile. I find it harder to single-hand a boat much bigger than 10 or 11 metres, and most boats out here are 40 feet upwards, and Golden Haze has a pretty high spec, and I'd spent a lot of money making her comfortable and easy to handle, so shipping my near-perfect boat worked for me. One thing I did get wrong was that really I should have gone for a 35 to 40 foot plus boat for comfort in inter-island sailing and living in. Normally out here, the marinas all have dinghies with a marinero to help you with parking, or at the very least take your mooring lines and help generally. Marina facilities in all the islands for helping you in and out of your berths make the UK look as if it's still in the Stone Age. There are certainly islands that are better than others, partly due to the fact that almost half of the islands are French or Dutch possessions and receive incomes or subsidies from the European Union. The rest of the islands are American or Puerto Rican or independent. In my opinion, we Brits did a great disservice to the Commonwealth Islands by just abandoning them financially and calling it independence. So whilst American and other Europeans are very welcome, in ex-Commonwealth Islands there seems to be an ongoing dislike of the British government, which so royally tucked them up, calling it a Commonwealth. That's not to say that British individuals are not made welcome, which they are, because the only industry of all the islands is tourism, and you don't bite the hand that feeds you. British tourists are very, very welcome. Sorry, it's a bit of a rant. Anyway, I'm out of here in a couple of weeks at the end of May, and we'll spend June to September at home enjoying a Northern European summer before heading back here for a few months. If I get bored, I'll just jet off to Spain or back to France and then back to the Caribbean for some more cruising, because the annual cost of all this is less than keeping my boat in Brighton Marina. And it's not about Marina Brighton, but it is pricey compared to this. Anyway, fair winds. Bye. My library of digital sailing books is at gentlesailing.com, so you can buy them as instant downloads. There's a link to a printer who can convert them to hard copy if that's what you prefer. I've just totally updated and republished French Canal Routes to the Mediterranean, which is now in its 12th edition and is fully up to date with new information, charts and pictures. Recently I published Your Boat in the Sun, which proved an instant popular success. It's about where to keep your boat in the Mediterranean or the Caribbean and the costs and the logistics involved. The Atlantic Crossing Guide has become a bestseller, and it outsells most of the others, probably because it's arguably one of the most comprehensive guides to sailing to the Caribbean that's available. The Gentle Sailing Route to the Mediterranean is one of the most popular publications that I have. It describes how to coast hop all the way to Gibraltar without having to spend a night at sea. There are books about marinas in the Med, sailing in the Caribbean islands, as well as a book on simple navigation, and even a Pacific Ocean crossing guide, and a book about just living aboard a sailing boat. Anyway, it's all at gentlesailing.com, so please do pay the site a visit and browse through my publications if you have a moment. Thanks. Fair winds.